What would you do if they came to take your children? What would you do if the knock on the door was not a neighbor, but the state, holding a piece of paper that could sever your world in two? For one mother, the sound was a flat, dead rap of knuckles against thin wood, a sound that cut through the afternoon haze. Outside her window, a government-issued sedan idled by the curb, its surface reflecting the cracked pavement and the indifferent blue of the Texas sky. Her little boy's hand tightened in hers, his small fingers a fragile anchor in a rising tide. On a small shelf next to the door, a hand-painted statue of the Virgin Mary stood watch, her serene plaster face unchanged for 50 years. The knock came again, harder this time, a sound of grim finality. The world held its breath, waiting for the door to open. Elena's life was mapped by the geography of other people's floors. By day, she pushed a mop through the gleaming lobbies of downtown San Antonio, Texas, the scent of industrial lemon cleaner clinging to her clothes. By night, she knelt on the worn linoleum of her own small apartment in the West Side, scrubbing away the day's grime. The two-bedroom flat, just off Buena Vista Street, was a testament to her constant motion. It was spotless but weary, the paint chipped around the door frames and a persistent flicker in the kitchen's fluorescent light. This was her sanctuary and her cage. It was where she read to her 7-year-old daughter, Sophia, her voice a low murmur against the sounds of the city. It was where she helped her 9-year-old son, Mateo, with his math, his brow furrowed in concentration under the dim light. It was a space defined not by what it had, but by what it held. The three of them, a unit forged in the quiet heat of their shared existence. Every evening, before she fell into a shallow, dreamless sleep, Elena would take a soft cloth to the small statue of the Virgin Mary her grandmother had carried from Mexico. She would polish the faded blue of the mantle and the chipped gold of the halo, her whispered prayers the only currency she had left. The plaster figure stood on a wobbly end table, a silent witness to the bills piling up on the counter and the growing thinness of her children's faces. Her apartment didn't just house her family, it mirrored her soul. It was clean on the surface, meticulously ordered, but beneath the floorboards, in the very foundation, a fracture was spreading. The walls felt thin, unable to hold back the noise of the world, a world that was now knocking at her door, threatening to sweep away the only thing she had ever built. The wound had opened under the sterile, buzzing lights of a hospital. It was a place of healing that had only deepened her injury. 2 weeks earlier, Mateo had fallen from the monkey bars at a nearby park. He was trying to go all the way across, his small hands reaching for the next rung, his face alight with determination. Elena was at her second job, cleaning a small law office on the weekends for extra cash. A job she hadn't declared. A neighbor had found him crying, his arm bent at a sickening angle. The emergency room at University Hospital in San Antonio felt like a foreign country. The air was cold and smelled of antiseptic. Doctors and nurses moved with a purpose that felt alien to her panic. While they set Mateo's arm, a woman with a clipboard and kind, tired eyes asked questions. Where was his mother? Why was he alone? How often did this happen? Elena, arriving breathless in her worn work uniform, tried to explain in broken English, the words catching in her throat. Her explanation was not enough. The questions became a report. The report became a file. The file was assigned a number and passed to a Ms. Albright from Child Protective Services. The official visit felt like an invasion. Ms. Albright walked through her small apartment, her sensible shoes making no sound on the linoleum. She noted the bareness of the refrigerator, the patch of peeling paint in the children's room, the fact that Elena worked 2 jobs and still barely made enough. Each observation was a stone laid on a scale, tipping the balance against her. Elena saw the judgment in the woman's eyes, a cool, professional pity that was worse than anger. She tried to show her the children's schoolwork taped to the wall, Sophia's colorful drawings of their family, 3 smiling stick figures under a bright yellow sun. She tried to explain the story of the Virgin Mary statue, how it had protected her family for generations. Ms. Albright just made a note on her pad, her face a mask of neutrality. The system, once activated, moved with its own logic, a current too strong to fight. At 2:15 p.m. on a Tuesday, the gray sedan returned. This time, Ms. Albright did not come alone. She brought the paperwork. Elena stood in the doorway, her body a weak barricade against the inevitable. Ms. Albright's voice was low and steady, reciting protocol, explaining the process of temporary foster placement. The words were clinical, detached, but they landed like blows. "It's for their safety, Elena, until we can conduct a more thorough evaluation of the home environment." Sophia started to cry, a thin, quiet sound that tore through the sterile language. Mateo, his arm in a bright blue cast, stood behind his mother, his eyes wide with a fear he was too young to comprehend. Elena's own breath was a knot in her chest. She pleaded, her voice cracking, begging for more time, for another chance. She promised to quit the second job, to find help, to do anything. A neighbor across the hall peeked through her blinds, her hand flying to her mouth. Down the street, two men working on a car paused, their wrenches held motionless as they watched the scene unfold. The quiet drama of the apartment block had frozen. Keys dropped from a hand in the hallway, the metallic clatter echoing in the sudden hush. Ms. Albright's face remained placid, unmoved. "The decision has been made," she said, and took a step forward. It was not an act of malice, but of procedure. It was the movement of a cog in a machine that was about to grind Elena's world into dust. The air grew thick, heavy with the silent screams of a mother watching her life end. The world shrank to the four walls of the living room. Ms. Albright's voice faded into a dull drone. The only reality was the sight of her children's faces, pale and streaked with tears. An instinct, primal and absolute, took over. She couldn't fight the state, she couldn't fight the paperwork, but she could run. She grabbed the worn house key from its hook, took each of her children by the hand, and pulled them past the stunned social worker. She didn't look back. They ran down the 3 flights of stairs, their footsteps a frantic echo in the concrete well. They burst out into the oppressive heat of the San Antonio afternoon. The sun was a hammer. People on the street turned to stare. Elena saw only one destination, a sanctuary of brick and stone a few blocks away. Her feet pounded the pavement, Sophia struggling to keep up, Mateo's good hand locked in hers. They reached the heavy wooden doors of Our Lady of Guadalupe Catholic Church on El Paso Street. She pushed them open and stumbled inside, the cool, incense-scented darkness a sudden relief. The whispers started almost immediately. The women who arranged flowers in the narthex saw her wild eyes. The old man who swept the floors saw the tear tracks on the children's faces. Word traveled from the church to the corner store, from the store to the panaderia. Elena, the quiet cleaner, had taken her children and run. The official car was still parked outside her apartment, a silent, waiting threat. Inside the cavernous silence of the church, Elena felt the terror begin to solidify into a cold, heavy weight in her chest. She found an empty pew in the back, the dark wood cool against her trembling hands. Sophia had cried herself to sleep, her small body curled against Elena's side. Mateo sat stiffly, his face buried in her shoulder, his small body shuddering with silent sobs. The world outside had vanished, replaced by the flickering glow of votive candles and the impassive faces of saints staring down from their pedestals. The minutes stretched into an hour. The late afternoon sun slanted through the stained glass windows, painting the stone floor in jewels of ruby and sapphire. But the light brought no warmth. A tremor started in Elena's hands, a physical manifestation of the storm inside her. She was a fugitive in the house of God. She had run, an admission of guilt in the eyes of the world. She could hear the sirens in her mind getting closer. The tightness in her chest was suffocating. Every creak of the old church, every distant cough from another parishioner sounded like the footstep of Ms. Albright. She was trapped. Her flight had only confirmed the official narrative. She was an unstable mother, incapable of providing a safe home. The silence of the sanctuary was a crushing weight, amplifying the frantic beat of her own heart. She had nowhere left to go. 4:03 p.m. The system would be looking for her now. She led the children, now awake and quiet, to the front of the church. They stood before the large, carved statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe, her head tilted in compassion, her arms open. Elena fell to her knees on the cold stone, the impact a dull thud in the silence. She had no more words, no more prayers. She could only kneel, her head bowed, a vessel of pure, helpless surrender. The heavy doors at the back of the church creaked open. Miss Albright stood there, flanked by two uniformed police officers. Their faces were grim. They walked down the central aisle, their footsteps echoing like hammer blows against the stone. They stopped a few feet from Elena. One officer rested his hand on his service weapon. Ms. Albright held her clipboard like a shield. "Elena," she said, her voice soft but firm, "please, don't make this harder than it has to be." As she spoke, an impossible light began to bloom from the statue of the Virgin. It was not a reflection. It was a soft, golden radiance that pulsed from within the painted wood, spilling across the altar and bathing the sanctuary in a warm, living light. A profound silence fell, so complete that the hum of the city outside vanished. The air grew thick with the scent of roses, a fragrance so rich and overwhelming it seemed to soak into the very stones of the church. One of the officers took a half-step back, his eyes wide. "What is that smell?" he whispered. Across El Paso Street, a woman named Maria Flores was watering the geraniums on her porch. She saw the light pour from the church's windows, a brilliant, silent explosion of gold. She would later tell everyone at the market, the whole building lit up like the sun was inside it. Back inside the church, a single clear bell tolled from the tower, a resonant C-sharp note that hung in the air long after it should have faded, even though it was only 4:27 p.m. The officers were frozen, staring. Ms. Albright's hand went slack, and her clipboard clattered to the floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden return of silence. The light receded as gently as it had appeared, pulling back into the statue until only the normal, dim light of the church remained. The scent of roses lingered, a ghost in the air. The bell was silent. Ms. Albright stared, her professional composure shattered. She looked from the statue to Elena, still kneeling, then to the two children huddled behind her. She looked at the officers, whose faces were a mixture of awe and disbelief. She bent down slowly and picked up her clipboard, the loose papers rustling in her unsteady hand. She looked at the printed checklist, the cold facts and observations that had led her to this moment. They seemed meaningless now, words from a different reality. She looked at Elena's face, no longer defiant or desperate, but filled with a profound, quiet calm. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She closed it, swallowed, and gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. I can't," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. She turned without another word and walked back down the aisle, her steps quick and uncertain. The two officers exchanged a look, then followed her out into the fading daylight, leaving Elena and her children alone in the rose-scented silence. Elena reached out a trembling hand and gently wiped a speck of dust from the base of the statue. She stayed there on her knees, her silent gratitude a more powerful prayer than any she had ever spoken. The ripples of that moment spread through the West Side. Ms. Albright's final report was an anomaly. It cited unexpected positive changes in the community support structure and recommended in-home monitoring and family resources instead of removal. The case was quietly closed a few months later. The following morning, Father Michael from Our Lady of Guadalupe found a box of groceries on Elena's doorstep, left by an anonymous parishioner who had heard the story. A teenager named Javier, who had seen the police car from his bedroom window, felt a strange pull. He started a small fund at his high school, collecting loose change and dollar bills, and presented Elena with an envelope containing $200 a week later. The younger of the two police officers, a man who had not been to church in 15 years, was seen attending Sunday Mass at St. Mark the Evangelist Catholic Church on the other side of San Antonio, sitting alone in the last pew, his head bowed. Maria Flores, the neighbor from across the street, began leaving a single, fresh rose at the base of the church's statue every single day. The community, which had been a collection of disconnected lives, began to weave itself into a net of quiet support around the family. A year passed. Elena still lived in the same apartment, but the light in the kitchen no longer flickered. A local women's shelter contacted by Ms. Albright had helped her find a single, better-paying job as a supervisor for a cleaning crew. The terror that had lived in her bones was gone, replaced by a quiet, steady strength. Every Saturday morning, she went to Our Lady of Guadalupe. She didn't just pray, she worked. She polished the pews, swept the stone floors, and tended to the small garden of roses that Maria Flores had planted near the main entrance. Her presence became part of the church. People knew her story. They didn't speak of it in loud voices, but in hushed, reverent tones. The corner of the sanctuary with the statue became a place of pilgrimage for the neighborhood. People would come to light a candle before a job interview, after a difficult diagnosis, or when they simply felt lost. A young woman, newly pregnant and terrified, once found Elena arranging flowers by the altar. She told Elena she was alone and didn't know what to do. Elena simply took her hand, led her to a pew, and sat with her in silence for a long time. That was her new mission, to offer the same quiet presence that had been offered to her. This story is a reminder that faith is not just a prayer whispered in darkness. It is the force that holds a family together, the light that shines when all other lights go out, and the quiet courage that turns a community of strangers into a circle of protection. It is the miracle that happens not just in a flash of divine light, but in the countless small acts of grace that follow. If this story touched you, like the video, subscribe to and share it with someone who needs hope today. Tell us your moment of unexpected grace in the comments.